Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more of our virtual conversations. The coronavirus has dealt a devastating blow to our cash-strapped cultural institutions, and the Metropolitan Opera is no exception. Peter Gelb is with us. Peter Gelb is the general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, and he had to close the doors of the opera on March 11, 2 months ahead of schedule, at a cost of $60 million, a victim of the coronavirus crisis. Peter will tell us how he has invoked modern technology to meet the existential challenge of the coronavirus, and will also tell us about his plans for a comeback, reopening the opera once this national nightmare is behind us. We are pleased to welcome Peter Gelb back to the program.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to see you and to join you in the program today.
Now, Peter, let's take the temperature. The Met is the nation's largest performing arts organization. It has a budget of $308 million. Where has the coronavirus left you?
Well, it's very difficult to be the largest performing arts organization when you're not performing. So we are in a unenviable situation, but one that all performing arts organizations in this country are in a terrible predicament of not having performances and not knowing when they will begin. So we are planning, as it is to run the Met is a complicated logistical exercise. I think I may have told you before, one of our board members is fond of quoting this Winston Churchill aphorism that the only activity more complicated than waging war is running opera or grand opera. And the challenges of running a regular season or planning for future seasons is significant. When you have no idea when you will resume and how you will resume, and you have to do multiple scenarios, which is the exercise we're going through on a daily basis, it's that much more complicated. The logistics are a nightmare.
Well, your principal source of revenue is the audience at the Opera House, isn't it? 3,800 seats?
Well, the principal source of revenue is a combination of the audience at the Opera House, and you're right, it is 3,800 seats plus another 400 standing room places when the capacity is needed. Of course, we rely upon a combination of earned revenue from the box office, from our live and HD transmissions to cinemas, which have been a hugely successful initiative over the past 14 years, and then the generosity of donors, because about half of our annual operating expenses are contributions, come in the form of contributions. So on the one hand, we have suffered greatly over the past 10 weeks in not being able to perform and losing all that revenue. On the other hand, our donors have very much felt a sense of responsibility to the Met, to which they have great loyalty. And the paradox of this shutdown has been that because of our opera streams that we have each evening, we have actually increased the number of donors by 18,000. There are 18,000 new donors to the Met who have fallen in love with opera or become aware of it perhaps for the first time because of our presence, our virtual presence. And we also have another 120,000 new entries in our database from people who have written into the Met. So, it's a double-edged sword. Certainly, we'd rather be performing.
Now, you've had to institute certain budgetary cuts, haven't you? You've furloughed employees. Perhaps you could tell us about that.
Well, unfortunately, an organization the size of the Met is so big that on the one hand, we don't qualify for PPP protection, payroll protection that was part of the stimulus packages to help businesses with 500 or fewer employees. We have closer to 3,000 employees. So we have no payroll protection benefits. As it is, we get very little money in support from city, state, or federal governments to start with. So we were forced, in order to not go out of business permanently, to furlough most of our full-time union employees while at the same time we're continuing to cover their health coverage, their health benefits, and we promise to do this at least through the fall. And we have, and we did pay our union employees for several weeks before we could no longer afford to do so.
How many employees were furloughed or affected by the cuts?
Well, of the full-time employees, there were more than 1,000 full-time union employees who were affected, who were furloughed, and also about 20% or 25% of our administrative staff as well. We've kept a significant number of administrative staff members on board because they are actively working. Our development staff is very busy raising money. Our media staff is very busy preparing our streams and other media activities. Our marketing staff is busy supporting those activities. So we have a lot of people working at the Met, although of course they're not in the building. We're all working remotely, like myself.
I read recently that you waived salary during the period of the crisis.
I felt there was no, it was the right thing to do. I felt I had to set an example. So right from the very beginning, I said I would not take a salary during this crisis.
So it's true that you embarked on this program of streaming. This is archival footage from when the opera was going strong, and you run that every week, and it's online and on demand, and you receive revenue from that.
Well, actually, it's not quite like that. I mean, there is, during the 14 years that I've been the general manager of the Met, one of the initiatives I began from the very start of my tenure was the transmission of operas into movie theaters. So over the past 14 years, we have built up a significant library of content consisting of over 135 of these HD programs, resulting in something like 500 or 600 hours of programming. In addition to that, we have all the historic telecasts going back to the 70s, beginning with Pavarotti singing in La Boheme with Renato Scotto. So we have, and there are about 100 of those programs. So what I decided to do was, as soon as we announced, the very day that we announced we were closing, we started offering a different one of these opera performances that had been captured on video every night for free. And the response was amazing. We had hundreds of thousands of people visiting the Met website every day to watch these programs. And so far we've had something like 8 million views of them. And it has benefited us mostly in people recognizing the cultural contribution that the Met was making, particularly to people who are obviously homebound around the world. We had a captive audience, and they enjoyed the fact that it was being offered for free. So as a result of that, our donations, even though we weren't charging for it, our donations took off, skyrocketed, and at the same time, our pay service, we have a pay subscription service called Metropolitan Opera on Demand, which you can subscribe to for $14.99 a month. That service, without any advertising, doubled its membership. So we now have, we went from 15,000 subscribers to that to something like 32 or 33,000 right now.
Have you given any consideration if in some communities they permit some gatherings in theaters with appropriate social distancing of beaming archival footage into those theaters and collecting revenue?
Well, that certainly is a possibility, but our main concern at this point is how we get the theater back into performance mode. And that seems to be quite far off because there is no way in which we can manage the guidelines of social distancing and putting an opera on at the same time, both from the perspective of the audience, which we cannot fit into the number of people we could fit into the theater under social distancing guidelines would be just, in the hundreds, not the thousands. And so that's economically not viable. But from a safety point of view, more importantly, a health point of view, it is impossible to put a performing company of hundreds of performers, an orchestra of 80 to 100 who sit inside of the orchestra pit in close quarters, and the chorus and the performers who have to be in physical proximity to each other on the stage. That's simply not possible under social distancing guidelines. And that's why, the governor's office here in New York has said that the performing arts would be the last group to come back. And certainly that's correct. And that applies not only to the opera, but to Broadway and to the ballet and all the performing arts.
Tell us about the at-home gala, which you launched. I call it the Skype Gala, in which you brought together, I guess, 40 performers from all over the world, and 98 chorus members of the orchestra. Whose idea was it to do this? And how did it happen? And how long did it take you to mount it?
Well, it's accurate to call it the Skype Gala because it was all executed via Skype. In fact, it was a kind of a higher grade level of Skype than normal people use. We were doing it with the help of a production facility that we typically supports our live and HD transmissions, a company called All Mobile. And we actually, we had 5 Skype lines going simultaneously as we were preparing to move from one location to the next and preparing our next performer. The idea for it, I guess you could say, came to me during one of my sleepless nights as I was trying to figure out what to do with the Met that would take advantage of our abilities in the area of electronic distribution, because we have, as you know, we've been a leader in this field. There's no opera company in the world that has the global audience that we have. So I wanted to try to take advantage of the fact that we have such strong relationships with our wonderful artists who are now spread out across the world in their own self-quarantines in their homes. The Met has always been known as a theater for great international voices. And so it seemed to me that this program would symbolize what the Met stands for artistically, while at the same time connecting audiences who are in sore need of some relief from the lockdown and the artists who are also in sore need of relief from the lockdown. It was fascinating as we were preparing for this program. I would spend days, and the whole thing was put together in about 2 weeks. I sent emails out to the various artists inviting them, and within 48 hours we had our roster lined up. I worked very closely with Yannick Nézet-Séguin, our marvelous music director, on shaping the program. He led the effort to make these wonderful pre-recorded pieces that could not be done live, which involved multiple members of our orchestra and chorus in moving performances that really were kind of in a way, the heart and soul of the whole program. But there were so many moving things about the program in ways that I didn't fully anticipate. The connection. I deliberately designed the program in a way that artists would hand off to each other, sort of the way an evening news anchor hands off to the next anchor. And that was, but I didn't know exactly how that would turn out. It turned out remarkably well because the artists were so excited to be actually performing instead of doing house chores for a change, and to connect with each other was so spontaneous and exciting for them. And the fact that it was mostly live, certainly all the individual artist contributions, made for a very emotional and exciting event.
Okay, I'm going to hand off to Yannick Nézet-Séguin, conducting the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra and chorus, singing Va Pensiero from Verdi's Nabucco. And we can show a segment of that because I think it will give people an idea of exactly what it was that you did. It was a marvelous feat. how many countries were represented in the gala?
You know, I don't remember at this point how many countries were represented, but I do know that, you know, we created, working with this very gifted design company in London who works a lot on Met Productions called 59. I challenged them to create an opening title sequence that used a map of the world and a globe to trace the performers who appeared from as far east as Tbilisi, Georgia, where Anita Rakvilishvili, one of the leading mezzo-sopranos of the world, sang Mon Coeur from Samson and Dalila, to across Europe, all the way down to Wales, where Bryn Terfel and his wife Hannah Jones, who used to be the royal harpist, and they're a married couple, sang a very moving gospel tune, back to across the Atlantic to the US, where we had a number of our most gifted American singers. And we sort of checkerboarded back and forth between the US and Europe throughout the whole event.
Well, there were a number of personal touches. I mean, one I remember, there's a glimpse of Renee Fleming's garden in Virginia. I don't think that was virtual. I think that was really a garden. Diana Damrau and her husband, Nicholas Teste, sang from their kitchen. It was really down to earth. And you mentioned Anita Rakvelashvili, who was billed as the greatest mezzo-soprano on the planet. And she had a sign next to her piano that said, "No autographs, please." So there were a lot of personal touches. One of the singers, Peter Matthai, the Swedish baritone, came to us from his home in the Stockholm archipelago. And here is the sweet music he sang, De Vieni alla Finestra, from Mozart's Don Giovanni.
De vieni alla finestra, oh mio tesoro, e vieni a consolare il pianto mio. Se neghi a me di largo davanti ai occhi tuoi morirò io.
You've been quoted as saying, Peter, that civilized society cannot exist without the arts, and we've seen how beautiful all these artists performed, how beautifully they performed. How do you assess the long-term damage stemming from the coronavirus crisis?
Well, that's difficult to know what the long-term damage will be. I mean, we're very happy that we are keeping the torch of opera burning brightly, at least in the short term, by connecting our audiences to the Met through events like our at-home gala and our nightly streams, and we're continuing them even though our season would have ended last weekend. We're continuing our streams throughout the summer. The question really will be, you know, is how and when we can come back, and then how and when the audience will come back. I don't think either will be possible until it's safe, and that's what we're, you know, relying upon or waiting for. The longer it lasts, the harder it's going to be.
Do you anticipate a fear factor that even if Governor Cuomo were to say it's now safe to attend a performance of the Metropolitan Opera, that many would not come because they'd be afraid?
I think the audience will I think the audience will not be afraid when they know it's safe. I think it's going to be, you know, as much as Governor Cuomo is respected, I'm sure he wouldn't say that unless it actually is safe. Meaning that there is a vaccine or enough immunity that everyone has already caught it and doesn't have to fear catching it again.
Can you visualize orchestra members and artists on stage and the chorus and the audience wearing masks during a performance of something other than ballo and masquerade?
I cannot visualize any situation where people have to wear masks to perform. They should be wearing masks now, but when we come back for performances, there will have to be a state of being where masks are no longer necessary.
What about your budget? You'd been operating at a budget reportedly of around $308 million. Do you anticipate that'll be contracted on a reopening or expanded possibly?
Well, certainly our budget has gone down with all the cancellation of performances. So there's no question that the world is going to have to adapt. We are going to have to change our economic model so that to make it possible. I think audiences will come back, but they will not come back immediately. It will take time, and we'll have to have an economic framework that deals with that reality of a slow recovery.
So what's your best guess as to when you might reopen? You had a planned reopening for September of 2020.
Well, that's our scheduled beginning of our
Yes.
season. I think at this point, we cannot say when we will reopen next year, next season. At some point, obviously, we're going to have to make a call for the fall. At this point, we're waiting to see how things develop. But I think it would require some miraculous turn of events to actually have a fall season. But, you know, we're always willing to accept miracles.
So I have a question for you, Peter Gelb. The Metropolitan Opera was founded in 1883. You've been at it for 137 years. It survived many challenges, perhaps less serious than this one, but it survived challenges. Will it survive the coronavirus?
Well, that's why we're all working so hard to make sure that it does. I believe that opera will survive. I believe the Met will survive. As I said before to you, and you said to me, a civilized society cannot exist without the performing arts. Opera is kind of a crown jewel in the performing arts pantheon, and we will do all we can to ensure that it will last.
And if some of our viewers out there want to contribute, can they go to metopera.org and do it?
They sure can. Metopera.org is the site, and it's unavoidable. If you go to that site, you will certainly find out a way to contribute to the Met, and we need your contributions.
There will be a button. So unfortunately, we've run out of time because it's been just marvelous. But Peter Gelb, thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. I'm Jim Zirin. Tune in next week for more conversations. Take care, be safe, and all the best. And we close with the marvelous Erin Morley singing the beautiful opera Chacun le sait from Donizetti's Fille de Régiment from her home in New Haven, Connecticut. And she closes with Viva la Met.
Il est là,